Hey guys, welcome to the shop. On today's adventure, we're going to be doing battle with Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein's miter, miter Frankenstein, I don't know. Just this thing that's cobbled together with a bunch of random parts, some old, some new. So grab a pitchfork and follow along. Now this is a project that I'd been thinking about for some time, but through the involuntary repurposing of these cabinets into the she shed, I finally had the opportunity to tackle it. Unlike the corner where the drill press cabinet is that gets some water infiltration when it rains really hard, I'm using pine for the base instead of white oak. Even carefully picking through the pile, the straightest of these 2x6s had a built-in U-turn. I used a joiner to square and flatten one face and one edge of the short 2x6s, but the back is 10 feet long, and I couldn't run that through my small joiner. So I cut some strips of plywood, screwed them down to the 2x6, with the edge of the plywood barely hanging over the edge of the 2x6. Then I could use that plywood as the reference against my fence to trim off the opposite side on the 2x6, making it square and flat. And then using the flat side of the 2x6s against the fence, I could cut them to desired width, which, funny enough, will become height later. Then I ran them through the planer to get them to uniform thickness. The joinery I want to use is miters, and if they were different thicknesses, the miters wouldn't line up right. Moments before cutting these miters, I had cut pretty deep rabbets on these short 2x6s, but somehow failed to record it. You can kind of see them in this clip. We now have 6 of these Harbor Freight 9-drawer toolboxes with casters, 4 in her shop and 2 in mine. Now I wanted to use referential measurements to get the exact fit for the base off the bottom of the box itself. Now, apparently Queenie and Princess, my shop chickens, were laughing at me while I tried out this Grizzly dual spindle doweling tool that I purchased a couple of weeks before I bought that Domino Joiner. I've never really used it, and I just wanted to try it out. Shop projects are the best time to try new techniques, and this cut some pretty nice holes, except for one point that I couldn't figure out that I'll point out in just a few minutes. This stand's going to have 2 of those 9-drawer toolboxes sitting on it, joined together by the 10-foot 2x6 in the back. The butt joint in the middle was the part that I couldn't figure out with the doweling tool, so I used dominoes, which you can see in this clip. After adding an electrical outlet directly behind where the miter saw will be and sweeping up the floor a little bit, I set the base in place, and then I could level the base up with shims and set my first box on there. Now I'm putting the drawers back in because I had to remove them to actually lift the thing to set it into the base. On the second one, thankfully, a family friend showed up and asked if I could use a hand, and I certainly didn't say no. I didn't want to make any permanent alterations to the toolboxes, just in case in the future I decided to use them as they were intended. So I had to come up with a way to attach the top that would not make any permanent changes to the toolboxes. I cut these end pieces out of plywood using a table saw and a jigsaw, and then drilled holes in it that matched up to the existing bolt hole locations for the handles that come with these boxes. Once I had the first one in place, I could locate where I wanted to cut the shelf for the miter saw to sit on. Now, this shelf is slightly lower than the height of the bed of the miter saw so that I can shim it to the correct height later. I used the first one as a template to cut 3 more and drilled out the bolt holes in the same location because on these boxes they have threaded inserts where the handle could be installed on either end. Everything lined up perfectly. I did have to buy these M6 bolts because the ones that came with the handles weren't long enough to go through the plywood. Then, using the top of the old cabinet that I tore out, it's just a piece of 3/4 plywood, I can measure and cut the shelf for the miter saw. A few pocket hole screws will ensure that the shelf doesn't move around, and it will also maintain the distance between the 2 boxes. Once I drilled them, I slid the shelf into place in the dado grooves that I'd cut on the end brackets. A 4-foot level stretched across the top of the boxes gave me a reference point to use setup blocks to determine the thickness of the shims to go under the feet. Once I had the saw in its proper location, I put a few screws in the feet and then started building out the raised portion. Now this raised portion will double as the fence that the stop block will ride on each side of the miter saw. Maintaining the trend to keep the boxes original, there are no fasteners directly connecting this raised portion to the top of the box. It's only connected on the ends on the 2 brackets with the M6 bolts that are in the threaded inserts from the factory. I could have chosen hardwood or even put a laminate on it, but I decided to go with just simple 3/4 plywood for the top. This cobalt blue, or Lowe's blue if you will, is my favorite color. And because I use it on the drill press cabinet, I decided to continue using it on the rest of my shop-made furniture. In order to use this piece of 1/8 by 1 inch steel for the stop block system, I had to drill some small pilot holes in it and then come back and countersink a slightly larger hole for the head of the screws. They're going to be holding it to the face of the raised portion. Acetone made quick work of the oil residue on these pieces of metal, and then I shot them with a couple of coats of black spray paint. I used a thin rip jig to cut several strips of this white oak to a little bit thicker than 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch is too thin for my planer, so I used double stick tape to stick these strips down to a piece of plywood and get them thinned out to the exact thickness of that 1/8 inch piece of steel that I'd painted earlier. I started on the bottom of the face, gluing 1 strip with wood glue and CA glue. And directly on top of that, I added this metal strip, which is screwed on with some 3/4 inch screws. And then another strip on top of the metal strip to flush it out with the top of the raised portion. I installed some blocking behind the base to keep it away from the wall enough to slide this 4-inch ducting behind it in order to use it as dust collection. I held it in place with some of these straps that I printed on my 3D printer. I added an aluminum blast gate and then added the dust piping. The 4-inch pipe goes to a hole in the bottom of the shelf that collects the majority, and the 2.5 goes to the factory connector on the saw. I drilled a hole in the handle for the blast gate and added a wooden extension so that I wouldn't have to reach under, but I could open and close it from in front of the saw. Now, this is an actual first test, and the results were very promising. There's no better feeling than getting to the point in a project where you can use that project to complete that project. And that's what I'm doing here when I use the saw to cut these pieces of white oak as edge banding for the plywood. And here I'm using the saw to cut down the pieces of plywood that are going to create the hood that goes over the saw. The hood is just glued and brad nailed together, but I know that I have to make it removable in the event that I want to make a bevel cut with my miter saw. This is not a cut that I make very often, but I did it twice on this project alone on each end of the 10-foot back portion of the base. So I'm going to use French cleat to hold it to the wall and some pins in the top of the raised portion to align it with. But French cleat only works if you install it in the right direction. I set the hood in place in order to get the exact location for the receiver cleat that screws into the wall. And then using a 1/4-inch drill bit with some tape on it as a depth stop, I added some dowel indicators, set it back into place, and tapped on it to leave a mark where I could use that same 1/4-inch bit to drill a hole for a 1/4-inch dowel. In the meantime, my preteen daughter got me all caught up on the 6th grade drama. She takes after her mother. And hours later, I got to start building a stop block system. I picked up these two 3/4-inch mag switch magnets off Amazon and drilled 3/4-inch holes in these pieces of white oak to install them. It was kind of neat using them as a self-clamp by turning the knob and clamping it to my table saw top. I used mineral spirits to clean up the top for the adhesive back of my built-on tape measure and then installed them, one on each side. And here is my finished miter station, and I'm very pleased with how it turned out. I really like the metal strip and how it works with the stop blocks. I've never had a station where I could, especially with an integrated tape measure, that I could just set a stop block and make repeated cuts. I always had to clamp a piece of wood to the surface of the cabinet in order to make the repeated cuts. So I'm happy with that. There's plenty of storage. There's 9 drawers in each one of these. And if I had to just buy the drawer slides, it would be more expensive than this entire station cost to make using these boxes that were already pre-made. There's a 4-inch dust collection port here. There's a 2.5 on this side that goes up and ties into the factory dust collection. Anything that the factory scoop here misses just gets sucked right back in there. I mean, it works really well, especially with the shroud over it. The shroud is removable in case I need to maybe make a bevel cut or something. I don't know. I don't make a lot of those, but I did make it removable in case I needed to. I just store my little stop blocks right there. They work really well. I mean, when they're locked in, they don't move. Then you turn the knob and you can move them wherever you want to. There's 4-inch dust hose and a 4 by 2.5 Y blast gate here that's connected to my knob, so I can open and close it from out here. And I'm very happy with how it turned out. So if you guys liked it, hit the like button, subscribe, help my channel grow, and thanks for watching.